kicked a handcuffed defendant right in the middle of the courtroom, and in that instant, he signed away his own badge. The steady murmur of the courtroom was torn apart by an act that crossed every line. Not a gunshot, not a scream, but a cold, deliberate kick driven straight into a man who was already in cuffs. Officer Brody Keller stood there holding the high ground, the corner of his mouth curling upward. To him, this wasn't violence. It was a lesson. A lesson meant for a nobody who didn't know his place. The handcuffed man hit the floor. He didn't cry out in pain. He didn't beg. He didn't fight back. He simply looked up straight ahead. That gaze was so cold, the entire courtroom fell silent. No one said a word yet. Everyone felt it. What had just gone down was not prey. Public Defender Ella Parker froze. She had defended hundreds of defendants, but she had never seen calm carry this kind of pressure. Judge Henry Caldwell brought the gavel down. He tried to turn everything into procedure. Keller, meanwhile, turned it into a display of power. The man in cuffs spoke. Not loud, not shaking, not pleading. "I am requesting permission to call my commanding officer." A scoff echoed through the room. A dismissive shake of the head followed. The courtroom chose to believe what it saw on the surface: a worn t-shirt, faded jeans, a man who looked like a drifter who had wandered somewhere he didn't belong. And at that exact moment, a phone rang in the hallway outside. Just one short ring, but enough to end the hunt. If you believe that true courage is not found in gunfire but in the silence of those who have lived through war, subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories, so together we can preserve the memory, the dignity, and the honor of our quiet heroes. Before there was a courtroom, there was a stretch of scorching asphalt running through a small town in Alabama, a place so quiet and orderly that it invited people to believe nothing truly wrong could ever happen there. A black pickup truck rolled forward at a steady pace, unhurried, unhesitating, as if the driver were merely passing through, leaving no trace, asking for no remembrance. The man behind the wheel was Chief Aiden Cross, 34 years old, on his way to Florida to visit his sister. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no patches, no insignia, just a gray t-shirt, jeans softened by years of wear, and a baseball cap pulled low. A casual glance would never reveal that he had once stood in places where the smallest mistake was paid for with a life. Aiden's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. Old scars ran across his knuckles, not dramatic, not immediately noticeable, but clear enough to tell a story. These were not the marks of ordinary labor. They were the remnants of a long life lived under constant tension, where the body learned to react before the mind had time to think. He had left those places behind, but they had never truly left him. Red and blue lights flicked on behind him. Not abruptly, not urgently. Just a familiar signal one Aiden had seen more than once in his civilian life. He glanced at the mirror, eased off the accelerator, and pulled over by the book. Engine off, window down. Both hands placed clearly on the wheel, nothing hidden, nothing ambiguous. "Good afternoon, Officer Aiden," said his voice low and steady. "License," the officer replied without returning the greeting. It was Officer Brody Keller. Keller's stance was not the stance of a man there to keep the peace. He stood too close. His shoulders leaned forward just enough. One hand hovered near his holster as if he were hoping something would happen. His eyes weren't observing, they were measuring. Not checking, but sizing up. Aiden took it all in within seconds. The off-center posture. The voice deliberately pressed low. The words chosen not to gather information, but to apply pressure. Old instincts stirred not loudly, but unmistakably. This was not a random traffic stop. This was the moment a hunter believed he had found suitable prey. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Keller asked. "No, officer," Aiden replied. "You were swerving," Keller said flatly. "I'm willing to take a test if you need one," Aiden answered. Keller smirked. He didn't need a test. He needed a reaction, an argument, a wrong move, an excuse just enough to push things further than they ever needed to go. Aiden understood that. He had seen eyes like these before in places where rules existed only when someone was strong enough to enforce them. Aiden swallowed his irritation. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. On American soil, in moments like this, winning wasn't about proving you were right. Winning was about not giving someone the excuse they were searching for. "I'm just passing through town," Aiden said slowly. "We don't like outsiders," Keller replied, his voice cold. The words hung in the air, heavier than any formal charge. Aiden stayed silent. He didn't explain who he was. He didn't say where he had served. He didn't mention the years when this country had called him a hero. He knew that in this moment every title meant nothing if it fell on ears unwilling to hear. Keller read that silence as defiance. But Aiden knew it was the only choice that kept things from spiraling out of control. He held his gaze steady, not lowered, not raised, just fixed like a man accustomed to waiting for storms to pass. In that moment, the sun-baked road of Alabama remained still. The small town stood quietly, pretending to be peaceful. And Aiden Cross, the man without a uniform, understood that this calm was not an ending, but the last deep breath before everything slipped out of the hands of those who believed they had the right to decide another man's fate. And from that silence, a small but deliberate act was chosen, setting in motion a chain of humiliation no one in that town could have foreseen. Keller didn't need another reason. He created one. Step out of the vehicle. The tone wasn't an order meant to keep the peace. It was the sound of a man trying to prove his authority over a stranger with no protection. Aiden opened the door. Not slowly, not hurriedly. He stepped out as if entering a situation whose ending had already been written, only waiting for someone else to read it aloud. "Have you been drinking?" Keller asked. "No," Aiden replied. "You were swerving. I'm willing to take a breath test." Keller gave a thin smile. "That won't be necessary." That answer told Aiden everything. When the truth is no longer being asked for, the conclusion has already been decided. Keller shoved Aiden around one hand, pressing hard into his shoulder, the way a man does when he wants to teach a lesson. Not violent enough to be called a beating, but forceful enough to send a message: "This is where you are, and this is who I am." Aiden didn't resist. He placed his hands on the hood as instructed. The heat of the metal seeped into his palms, real and undeniable, just like the situation itself. "I'm requesting a breathalyzer," Aiden said. "No need," Keller replied. "I'm requesting a blood test. Be quiet. I'm requesting to call a lawyer." Keller leaned in close, his voice pressed low against Aiden's ear. "Here I decide when you get to speak." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy, heavy like a door slamming shut. During the search, Keller pulled a neatly folded envelope from Aiden's back pocket. Thick paper, an official seal. Keller glanced at it without reading, then slipped it into his own jacket, as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper that had accidentally found its way into his hand. "What's that?" Aiden asked. "Not relevant," Keller replied, signaling for the cuffs. Metal snapped shut around Aiden's wrists with a dry click. Not painful, but cold. Cold in the way only those who have been cuffed understand the chill of having your freedom taken without explanation. His phone was confiscated. His keys were taken. The pickup truck was towed away. Aiden was brought to a place they called the station, but he knew better. This was a different kind of space. Here, procedure wasn't used to protect justice. It was a wall thick enough to hide what shouldn't be seen, and legal enough that no one would be held accountable. "I have the right to make a phone call," Aiden said to the desk officer. Later, the man replied without looking up. "How long when we have time?" Time began to stretch in a distorted way. No clock, no updates. Just doors opening and closing, footsteps passing by as if he didn't exist. They delayed his phone call. They delayed sleep with lights that never went off. They delayed hope with deliberate indifference. Aiden sat upright on the hard bench. He didn't bang on the door. He didn't curse. He didn't beg. He watched. He listened. He remembered. The way a door closed harder than necessary. The way a guard avoided his eyes. The way Keller laughed with others as he passed the holding cell. This wasn't the first time Aiden had been surrounded by a hostile system. He had learned how to survive in organized chaos where every small detail could be a key or a trap. He knew that emotional reactions only made things easier for the ones running the game. When he was brought into court, his wrists were still cuffed. Public defender Ella Parker was already waiting a file so thin it was nearly empty. She looked at him, then at the cuffs, then lowered her voice. "They want you to plead guilty and be done with it," Ella whispered. "If you don't, they'll keep you here longer." Aiden looked straight at her. His eyes held no anger, no panic, only resolve. "I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do," he said. Ella fell silent. She had heard that sentence many times before, but never spoken with a certainty that made it clear this wasn't stubbornness. It was a line that would not be crossed. Aiden sat there on the edge of a courtroom, about to open, wrists bound, and dignity placed on the scales by people who didn't know or didn't want to know who they were dealing with. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing: this humiliation was not the end. It was only the first step in a game where those in power had badly misjudged their opponent. And as the courtroom doors opened, that private humiliation was about to become a public reckoning, one where every choice would leave no room for retreat. The courtroom opened like a machine long accustomed to its work. Inside, Keller stood tall, his voice ringing out as he played the role of the hero with the confidence of a man who knew he was on home ground. Every sentence was carefully shaped to sound like the defense of order, but beneath it lay the pleasure of power indulged for far too long. Across from him sat Judge Caldwell, his face stern, the gavel striking a steady rhythm, as if justice could be measured by the speed of proceedings. Aiden sat at the defendant's table, his wrists still cuffed. He looked straight ahead, neither lowering his head nor lifting it in defiance. When asked, he spoke clearly, each sentence short and unadorned. I was stopped without lawful cause. I requested a breathalyzer and a blood test. I requested to call a lawyer. All of those requests were denied. The words fell onto the courtroom floor like stones dropped into shallow water. No ripples, no movement. A few quiet chuckles rose from the back rows, tired, familiar sounds, as if constitutional rights were nothing more than a diversion for those who didn't understand the local rules of the game. Caldwell cut in. We proceed based on the report. Keller nodded, quick and automatic like a reflex well-trained. The defendant was aggressive, non-compliant, showing signs of intoxication. Aiden turned toward the judge. Your Honor, no tests were conducted. Caldwell didn't look back. Noted. Ella stood. She barely managed to begin her first sentence before the gavel struck. Counsel, maintain order. Your Honor, sit down. The interruption was swift and precise, like the blade of a system long practiced at crushing those without the time, money, or power to push back. Ella sat down, her hands clenched, her eyes flicking toward Aiden in an unspoken apology. Keller stepped closer, close enough that his breath pressed into the defendant's space. His voice dropped, no longer meant for the court. You should know your place. Aiden didn't answer. He held Keller's gaze, not provocatively, just steady. That calm unsettled Keller. He was used to fear, to bowed heads. This composure revealed something dangerous. His authority was no longer being reflected back the way he expected. Words turned into threats. Threats turned into action. Right there in front of the public in the very place called justice, the line was crossed. A hard shove. A kick without cause. The scrape of metal against the floor. Aiden went down. The courtroom tilted for a brief moment, then went silent. Caldwell brought the gavel down, not to stop what had happened, but to stamp a familiar script into place. The defendant acted dangerously. The officer was protecting the court. Truth was shielded by procedure. In Oak Haven, they protected each other before they protected justice. Eyes averted, heads turned away. The machine kept running. Aiden lay still for a few beats. He didn't groan. He didn't curse. He didn't call out to anyone. He drew a slow, deep breath, the kind learned by those who have trained to control their heart rate under mortal pressure. Then he looked up. His eyes held no plea, no cheap challenge, only enough clarity for the room to understand that this had gone beyond the control of those who believed they held it. You just chose the wrong man to make an example of. His voice was low, firm. It didn't need repeating. The sentence didn't make the room louder. It made it heavier. A few people swallowed hard. Others dropped their gaze to their files as if searching for an escape. Caldwell avoided that look, hurriedly pushing the proceedings forward as though speed could erase what had just occurred. Ella stood again. This time she didn't speak. She looked at Aiden, looked at Keller, looked at Caldwell. She understood with painful clarity if she walked out of here without doing something, an innocent man would be crushed in lawful darkness, and she would carry that memory for the rest of her life. When the hearing recessed, Ella stepped into the hallway. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that the fragile line between law and abuse of power had been torn apart right in front of her, and that responsibility no longer lived on paper. In that moment, while the courtroom still echoed with the residue of protection and denial, Ella knew there was only one way left to pull the truth back into the light. She had to call the right person, and she had to do it now. The cell door opened again. Ella Parker stepped inside, but this time she didn't carry the guarded restraint of a public defender trying to follow procedure. She carried the worry of a decent person who had just watched the final line get crossed. The way she stood, the way she looked at Aiden, everything was different. Are you hurt? Ella asked. No notepad, no file in her hands. I'm fine, Aiden replied. I've been through worse. He sat upright on the cold bench. The marks from the cuffs were still visible on his wrists. His jaw was tight. But his eyes were steady, not the kind of steadiness that comes from forcing strength, but the calm of someone who knows exactly where he stands in this story. "They're going to keep you here," Ella said quietly. "They'll drag this out. They'll wear you down until you plead guilty just to make it stop." Aiden shook his head almost imperceptibly. "They don't understand how I was trained." Ella took a slow breath. She glanced around, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Aiden didn't ask to use the phone. He didn't mention his rights. He spoke plainly without detour. "You have a phone," he said. "You're the one who needs to call." Ella blinked. "Call who?" Aiden tilted his head slightly and spoke slowly, each word dropping like a security code. A line in Washington, a name, a passphrase. He recited a short sequence. No explanation, no emphasis. But the way he said it made Ella understand this wasn't desperation dressed up as bravado. This was information held back for the right moment. "Who are you?" Ella asked, allowing herself for the first time to step outside her professional role. Aiden met her gaze. "I'm someone who served, and I'm still serving." Ella hesitated for exactly one beat, long enough to weigh her career, her credibility, and the risk of looking like a fool if she trusted the wrong man. Then she looked at Aiden's almost unsettling calm and understood that if he were lying, it would be a lie with no reason to exist. "All right," she said. "I'll call." She left the cell and stepped outside where the signal was stronger. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. She dialed. Waited. 1 ring. 2. Office came the voice on the other end. No curiosity. No small talk. Just precision. "I need to report something," Ella said. "An assault that occurred in a courtroom. State your identity." "My name is Ella Parker, public defender in Oak Haven." A brief silence followed. No typing. No sigh. Just absolute focus. Ella delivered the truth as concisely as she could. A handcuffed man was assaulted in open court. The officer was the one who struck him. The judge witnessed it and chose to ignore it. The line went quiet again. This time the silence had weight. Then the voice returned lower now. "Name of the detainee, Aiden Cross." Rank Ella swallowed. He didn't say. "But he told me to call." A pause. Then the response landed like a stake driven into the ground. "You are safe. Do not return there. We are coming to retrieve him." "Retrieve," Ella repeated, her heart racing. "Keep your phone with you," the voice continued. "And don't tell anyone." The call ended. The screen went dark. Ella stood still for a few seconds, as if she had just stepped out of a room with entirely different pressure. She went back to the cell and looked at Aiden through the bars. "What did they say?" Aiden asked. "They said I'm safe," Ella replied. "And they told me not to go back." Aiden nodded just barely. "That's enough." "Do you know how far this is going to go?" Ella asked. Aiden looked down at his hands, then back up. "No, but I know where it has to start." Ella understood. This was no longer a small-town case. This was the moment when truth brushed up against a much larger system, one where power wasn't shielded by local connections. She looked at Aiden, and for the first time didn't see a defendant. She saw someone holding his position as a storm gathered. "Thank you for trusting me," Ella said. Aiden shook his head. "You're the one who chose." And the moment Ella walked out of the detention center, gears began turning far away, moving straight toward Oak Haven at a speed no one in that town yet understood. Sheriff Buck Riggs leaned back in his chair, a half smile on his face, as if Oak Haven were his personal territory. "Leave him there," he said to Keller. "A few days and he'll learn his place." Keller nodded, his smile thin. "Everyone learns fast around here." The private phone on Riggs's desk vibrated. He glanced at it, frowning. "Who's calling at this hour?" Riggs picked up. "Riggs speaking." The voice on the other end spoke briefly, flatly. Riggs's expression changed. "Say that again?" The radio in the hallway crackled to life, rapid and urgent. "Airspace priority. Military identifiers confirmed. Convoy entering the jurisdiction." Riggs shot to his feet. "This is a small town. There's no exercise scheduled." The radio operator swallowed. "Sir." They didn't ask. Outside the station, townspeople stopped where they stood. No one understood why government-plated SUVs appeared all at once, moving in a tight, decisive line. No blaring sirens. No show of force. Just speed and order that made every cover story instantly useless. Keller stepped onto the front steps. What the hell is a man in a high-ranking naval uniform stepped out of the lead vehicle? His stride was straight. His shoulders open. His eyes didn't probe, they confirmed. Admiral Thomas Grayson, he introduced himself, his voice level. He didn't need to raise it. Hands that had hovered near weapons lowered on their own. Riggs stepped forward, forcing his voice steady. Admiral, you can't. Grayson cut him off without raising his tone. You are holding a strategic asset of the United States. Riggs froze. What are you talking about? Bring him out. Now. Keller interjected. Sir, that man is a suspect. Resisting. Aggressive. Grayson turned to Keller and looked straight at him. Are you the one who assaulted a handcuffed detainee? Keller stiffened. I was just yes or no. Yes. Grayson gave a slight nod. Noted. He turned back to Riggs. Seal all computers. Seize all records. No one leaves. The orders were repeated. Clear. Unambiguous. Riggs tried to push back. This is local jurisdiction, Grayson replied evenly. Not anymore. Computers were locked down. Files were removed. Familiar drawers were opened by hands that did not belong to Oak Haven. Power left the local badges and returned to where it belonged, to authority rooted in truth. Riggs lowered his voice. You don't understand us. Grayson met his eyes. I understand enough. The cell door opened. Aiden Cross stepped out. His face bore the marks of exhaustion. His jaw was still tight, but his back was straight. His gaze steady. Grayson stopped in front of him. Chief. Aiden came to attention. No flourish. No haste. A proper salute, exactly the respect this place should have shown from the start. You all right? Grayson asked. Yes, Admiral. Was your ability to exercise your rights obstructed? Yes, we've documented it, Keller stammered. I didn't know who he was. Aiden turned to him, his voice calm. You didn't need to. Grayson continued, colder now. That's correct. You didn't. Riggs watched the exchange, sweat beating at his temples. Admiral, we were just following procedure, Grayson replied. Procedure is never an excuse for violence. Grayson extended his hand. Let's go, Chief. Aiden moved forward. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been revealed. As Aiden passed Ella, she stood still. Thank you, Aiden said quietly. Ella shook her head. No. Thank you. Grayson paused at the doorway and turned back one last time. From this moment on, everything here is under federal control. No one answered. No one dared. Aiden walked out of the detention area, and in that same moment, the story ceased to belong to Oak Haven. Alone, it entered a phase of exposure where every shield would be forced to face the truth. They returned to the courtroom. Not to make noise, not to intimidate, but to close the book on a dirty game that had existed for far too long, right on the desk that had once been called justice. Judge Henry Caldwell sat there, but he no longer sat high. His back was rigid. His shoulders sagged. His eyes no longer swept the room. They searched for an exit among faces that no longer looked down. What had once been shielded by habit and local power now lay exposed before people who did not belong to Oak Haven. Begin, a voice said, short, precise. Evidence was placed on the record. No long explanations. No narration. This is the road footage, Ella said, her voice clear. No swerving. No signs of intoxication. Another file was opened. This is the moment the defendant requested a breathalyzer. Denied. This is the request to call a lawyer. Delayed. Caldwell pressed his lips together. I rule based on the officer's report. Ella did not step back. You know that report is false. Caldwell snapped, then caught himself. You don't have proof, we do, another voice cut in. From this very courtroom. The air grew heavy. Another recording was placed on the table. No introduction. Only the truth. Caldwell looked, then looked away. That's enough, he said, but his voice no longer commanded. You saw it, Ella said. This time she did not tremble. You chose to cover it up. Caldwell rose halfway from his seat. You don't understand the pressure here, Ella answered immediately. Pressure does not permit violence. Pressure does not permit lies. and pressure does not place you above the law. Caldwell looked around. No one avoided his gaze anymore. "You don't know who I am," he muttered. Aiden stepped forward one pace. He did not wait to be invited. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat someone correctly," Aiden said. The room went silent. The law is not a gift. The law is an oath. No one objected. No one scoffed. Another stack of files was pushed to the center of the room. Thick, heavy. "This is not an isolated incident," Ella said. "This is a pattern." She turned page after page. Arrests, fast convictions, asset forfeiture, prolonged detention. People without good lawyers, people without money, people with no one to stand for them. One name, then another. Faces that had once sat exactly where Aiden had sat. People who had been advised plead guilty and be done with it. Caldwell breathed hard. "Those are administrative procedures." Aiden replied, "No, this is business." The words were not loud, but they were enough to expose the deepest layer of it all, not merely abuse of power, but a system designed to profit from human beings. Ella looked at the files people she had once represented signatures she herself had placed. She understood a painful truth: some mistakes cannot be fixed with an apology. She stood straight. "We don't fix this with words. We fix it with action. Bring them into the light, one by one." Caldwell sat down. This time no one asked him to. His voice was smaller now. "I only followed the way things have always worked." Aiden looked at him. "That's why it has to stop." There was no gavel strike. None was needed. The lesson was not about who had been handcuffed. It was about who dared to stand up when the system demanded silence. Ella drew a deep breath. She was no longer the exhausted public defender of that morning. She had seen the bottom, and she knew she could not go back to who she had been. Aiden stepped back a pace. He didn't need to say more. What mattered had been said. And once the door of truth had opened, the question was no longer who was wrong, but who would stay to repair what had been broken. Oak Haven did not change its fate because of retaliation. The town changed because of a thorough reckoning, one with records, prosecutions, and accountability carried through to the end. Everything happened quietly, yet decisively. No hollow promises, no backroom compromises. Only documents signed, decisions enforced, and doors once sealed now opened to the light. Keller no longer had power to lean on. The badge that once made him feel untouchable was taken away. Words that had long been ignored became evidence. Riggs was handcuffed by the very procedures he had used to bind others. Caldwell stepped down from the chair that had shielded wrongdoing for far too long. He left without ceremony, carrying only the silence of someone who finally understood that authority does not grant immunity. Cases were reopened. Names were read aloud. Sentences were reviewed. People who had been crushed in the dark were brought back into the light. Some stepped out with trembling hands. Some cried without a sound. Some simply stood still for a long time, as if they needed extra moments to believe that freedom no longer came with conditions. The town saw what it had long avoided: truth does not destroy a community. Silence does. Ella was no longer the public defender who arrived 5 minutes late and lost from the start. She became the one at the front, not out of ambition, but out of responsibility. She reread the files she had once signed, corrected what could be corrected, and spoke the words that needed to be spoken. Every decision she made carried the memory of those who had not been heard. She learned to speak slowly, act firmly, and not turn away when the system demanded silence. Aiden completed the necessary formalities to leave Oak Haven. He went to Washington to stand among those honored for what they had done when the country needed them far from home. But for Oak Haven, his hardest battle had been fought on American soil, where honor is not attacked by bullets, but by the habit of disregarding human worth. He did not stay for applause. He did not explain who he was. He simply held his position, someone who did what needed to be done and then moved on. Before leaving town, Aiden shook Ella's hand. The grip was brief, firm, without promises. "You made the call," he said. "You saved a town." Ella shook her head gently. "Number one, I just didn't stay silent." Aiden's vehicle rolled away. No one waved dramatically. No one ran after him. But many eyes followed, not to hold him back, but to remember. For the first time, Oak Haven understood that the most frightening thing is not power. The most frightening thing is the silence of people who know they are standing on the right side. The town did not become perfect, but it became awake. And that is the true legacy, not the names that were erased, but the people who were given back their dignity. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories so that none of their memories are ever forgotten. Brave Veteran Stories, we remember the quiet heroes.